politics, commentary, entertainment, sports, news, and opinion. Now, here is Steve Malzberg.
To test these internal controls, GAO went undercover, created 18 fictitious identities to apply for insurance subsidies online, over the phone, and in person. When GAO applied for premium subsidies online or over the phone with fictitious names, Social Security numbers, and documents, it succeeded over 91% of the time. When GAO went to seek help from taxpayer-funded assisters, 5 times out of 6 they were turned away or unable to find help. When GAO sent in fake documents to support their applications, federal contractors accepted those documents.
All right, folks, that's Chairman Bustani, Congressman, of course, talking about what the GAO did in going undercover and purchasing Obamacare and applying for and receiving subsidies with fraudulent documents. And we have discussed this. We discussed this yesterday, and we've discussed it a little bit today. And when Stephen Moore joins us, hopefully in a minute or two here, we will be able to get his take on that. But, you know, the excuse that, well, you know, any new government program is going to be riddled with fraud, that's true. However, it doesn't end. I mean, you look at government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, you name it, and fraud is rampant, and it continues. It's not just something that happens when it's new. It's something that goes on and on and on as long as the program exists. There's fraud in almost every aspect of government programs, government handouts, whatever you want to call them, safety nets. There's fraud, and this drives the cost up, obviously, of everything. And when it comes to the miserable failure of Obamacare on so many levels, you add this to the mix. You add this to the mix, and you got yourself a problem, a big problem, and it needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed by people who will respond quite differently than saying, well, you know, fraud's always a problem with any new government program, because that's not the case here. This is when you're talking about, as they were talking about, 11 out of 12, fraudulent attempts were successful, and 8 out of 10 fraudulent attempts were successful. That, I don't have to tell you, that percentage is huge. And that is a huge, huge red flag that has to be fixed. Okay, joining us now is Stephen Moore, Chief Economist for the Great Heritage Foundation. Hello, Stephen, my friend.
Hi, Steve. I was just listening to your conversation, what you were talking about, your discussion.
My rant, yes, my rant.
And I wanted to say this, it's infuriating that anyone would say, well, these are just some, bugs that have to be worked out of the system. I mean, there was a report that came out about a week or two ago, I think you and I talked about it on this show, of about $100 billion a year, of about $100 billion a year in faulty and fraudulent payments don't deserve and they don't qualify for. And now we've added Obamacare onto this. When, Steve Malzberg, are we going to get serious about, fixing this fraud and maybe sending people to jail who are ripping off the American taxpayer?
Yeah, well,
the American taxpayer.
Yeah, well, you might have to have stringent ID program. ID is racist, so what are you going to do?
Well, the other problem related to this, Steve, is, we've seen obviously all the problems with the IRS over the last several months. The IRS is simply incapable of doing the enforcement here. They're too busy going after conservative groups to root out fraud in a program like this. I'm just not sure that they're capable of, looking at the people's incomes, finding out whether they're actually qualified. I mean, I believe you're going to have rampant fraud in the Obamacare system, assuming it ever gets off the ground. And you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of faulty payments, and those are going to come out of your pocket and mine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Were you, as I was, encouraged by the D.C. Circuit panel's ruling the other day, and then a little bit discouraged with the follow-up ruling on the same day in the other direction by the Fourth Circuit?
I actually came away from the whole thing encouraged, and you're right. These two, panels came away with completely diametrically opposite conclusions. But the one that you and I agreed with was the one that said, look, the language of this law, as that circuit court said, is, quote, unambiguous, unquote. And it's unambiguous on the fact that the law says that you cannot run subsidies through the federal system because they wanted this to be a state program. And now, I read these liberals saying, oh, well, the law means what we want it to mean. It's like Humpty Dumpty. Words mean what I want them to mean. And
that's like Obama. That's Obama's take on everything. That's how he operates.
But it gets back to we'll read the bill after we'll figure out what it means after we pass it. Truly though, Steve, it's laughable, but it's also horrifying that they're just making the stuff up as they go along. They feel like they can just interpret the law any the way they wish, even though the law specifically says that the subsidies have to be run through the states. This is going to the Supreme Court. This is going to the Supreme Court. And I think if we win this, and I think we will, because the language is so crystal clear here, and it's crystal clear that the Obama administration is acting outside the law, this drills a big hole into the Obamacare law, and I'm not so sure that the whole ship will float with this drilling of the hole.
Yeah, no, and you have to be encouraged because 12 times, 13 times in the last 2 years, we've had 9-0 decisions against the overreach of this administration in one form or another, and this seems just so black and white. You could say it's a matter of language, you could say it's not the intent, you could say, but the law says what the law says, and if Congress wants to change it, Congress will change it. Now, we know Congress will not change it, and you're right, this will be a gaping hole,
You're right. I just wanted to add one other thing. Not only is the language clear, but the legislative intent was clear. I remember when we had this debate, the Obama people said, no, this isn't going to be a federal program. Remember this, Steve? They said, no, this will be a program.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be run by the states. That was what they told us.
Yep.
Even in the legislative debate, they told us it would be a state program. Now none of this, you've got 2/3 of the states that don't want to have state exchanges, and the whole thing is coming unraveled.
By the way, a great piece at National Review that you wrote about a future without electricity. And before I read the story and I just saw the headline, I thought, okay, this has to be about what I just talked about a little while ago before you came on. And that was a story about the sun. 2 years ago, there was a sunstorm of great intensity, dating back the strongest since the 1800s. And if it had hit us a week later or earlier, we all would have been doomed as far as power grid and power and electricity for maybe years and years and years. And now I'm reading today that Al-Qaeda and some nation states and others are really gearing up to hit us with a cyber 9/11 attack, which again would target our power grids. And my God help us if that happens. And then I read what your story is about, and it's not about an attack on our power grid from without. It's about attacking our ability to produce electricity from within.
Exactly. I was just thinking about when you were describing. And it all came about from when I took my sons to see the movie Planet of the Apes. I don't know if you've seen
I saw that too. I did the same thing. Yes.
And I thought, and it's for those who haven't seen it, the theme is the humans are trying to fight back, but what don't they have? They don't have electricity. And when you don't have electricity, your whole way of life is frozen in place, and it wasn't until they got electricity. But my point, the real point here is, if we continue to put coal out of business, say we don't want to do fracking, we don't want natural gas, we don't want oil, we don't want nuclear power, we don't want dams, we don't want electricity from 90% of the places we get it from, we are going to have rolling brownouts in this country. And this isn't just me saying this. A lot of the top executives from the utility companies are saying, wake up, America. If we don't have a reliable source of electricity, and wind and solar power are, at least now, they are not reliable sources of electricity, we're going to have not just brownouts, but blackouts of American cities. And people are going to go, and they're going to say, how did this happen?
Yeah, and you know what happens along with blackouts, and it's so afraid. I was just saying again in that previous segment before you came on, I told of these two stories, and I said, you know, my town in Jersey was hit by Sandy, but it wasn't even a hurricane. It was the wind that got us, and I was without power for 8 or 9 days. So imagine, God forbid, if they, you know, if your scenario comes true, or if even, you know, the cyber attacks come through, people have to understand. But there's no excuse. We just have to hope that there's a Republican administration or a new administration in power in 2017 that's going to reverse all these, you know, crackdowns on our ability to produce energy.
You know, it's funny, you mentioned going several, 6 or 7 days without electricity. We had a big storm here in Virginia last summer, and in our house, we were without electricity for about 36 hours. And my kids thought it was the end of days. They couldn't imagine life without television.
I know. And
if it can't last 36 hours, what are we going to do when we have a real crisis? And all these young people say,
God
oh,
forbid.
Clean energy and so on. They have no idea what we're in for if we're not using our coal resources and our natural gas and our oil and our nuclear power. That's where we get 80% of our electricity, Steve. You know that.
I know. All right, listen, I appreciate it, Stephen. And by the way, half the town had power in my case, half didn't, so we could go across the street to the pizza restaurant and eat. But in a real blackout, that doesn't happen. Thank you, Stephen Moore. Great to talk to you, my friend, as always. Chief Economist for the Heritage Foundation. Give Me 5 is next, folks. Don't go away.